So where do you think, what do you think there's a correlation between the water bearer and a huge water vapor eruption in our atmosphere that they've never seen before? Maybe this is a cycle too. When the water bearer comes back, maybe that volcano erupts once every 25,000 years, but it erupts. They know the cycle.
The Cahokia civilization appeared in the Mississippi Valley in the middle of the United States about 600 AD. Now that civilization started flourishing, and the strata that tells us what was going on there says through several hundred years, they dealt with severe droughts and they kept building closer and closer to the river. But at some point, a massive flood happened down the Mississippi. And we know that because the Cahokia civilization just stopped dead in their tracks. And what we find through their archaeological evidence is this big layer of silt and clay.
Because if you're going to go to central bank digital currencies, that will be kind of at the end of our generation that people will be fully into it. There's going to be this transition period, probably 20 years, 15 years, where, you know, I'm going to say no, you'll say no, a lot of people will say no, but a lot of people will say yes, and there's going to have to be a medium of barter or exchange in the middle there, which will exist for some time. So I'm looking at gold and silver would be one of those options. Because, yeah, you can always say real estate and tools and all this stuff. Oh, seed's another one. But in terms of really going into another city or a market and having something that'll buy you, could you really trade the tools? Maybe. But for sure, you slap an ounce on the glass and somebody's going to say, I'll take that. Financial system ain't coming back, for my best pronunciation. It really isn't. It's meant to cause so much chaos for the escape of those who took the supply chains over. You're not in their club, sorry. So you need a diversion while they're escaping, and then, you know, they'll have to cancel meetings, and you can't have this offices open anymore, so everybody just disappear like they did online before. Now with AI, do you know if they're real or not real? But a lot of stores are going to close too, and that would be a soft way to get for, how do you think, a curfew. Think about a curfew without being called a curfew. If all the food stores are closed at like 6, 7 o'clock and there's really no businesses and everything's closed in terms of business, that's going to shrink down to huge amount of traffic. And there's only going to be just a few people on the road versus what there would now. Don't give people a reason to go out and they won't go out. The gold and silver. Once people realize where this is headed, there definitely won't be enough of it. I could say that. Nor tools either. But me looking at this, I always knew gold and silver would be a storeway where the money's going to run to. A lot of money ran from the mid-sized banks out to bigger banks like JP Morgan, Bank of America, blah, blah, blah. But a lot of that money they got pulled out. Some of that went up to Bank of America, JP Morgan, but 50% of it stayed and went to the coin or the bullion dealer. People, they understand it now. It's starting to make even the most basic of news that this metal's price is going up and the dollar is not going to be used around the planet anymore. Business will change. Maybe you have to prove your funds and show your gold and silver before you go into the supermarket. That'd be crazy.
Yeah, I would like to ask the audience a question, because here we'll get into this article. We have this date, 2030, that you've been using for your whole channel, the whole idea. So this is the same date that they're giving how the transhuman movement, or the future of gene editing and all of this stuff, come together. So here's part of what they're trying to tell you, that, don't worry about it. You could listen to that crazy conspiracy theorist guy, David DuByne, about what it's going to be like by 2030. Or you could listen to us, and you could live forever. Immortality by 2030. Immortality, they're going to load you in a machine, if you can believe that. They want to freeze your brain. I don't know how that's going to work out without a body. I mean, why would you want to be living as just a brain? And then they have cell rejuvenation, because if you've looked into the technology of that, it's really close to the legends of the vampiric stuff and, ambrosia, things like that. And then reanimating the brain by giving it a cocktail of different chemicals. So if you've looked back, if you're a fan of David DuByne and Adapt 2030 and the message that he's been giving out, do you believe that message of growing food, preparing, figuring out your environment, or do you trust them that don't worry about it? We'll just put your brain on ice. We'll load it in a computer. And you know what? That'll save space too. And then you wonder why we live in such a civilization that's starting to show signs of empire collapse. You can compare it to any of these ancient civilizations that fell. But how did they get us to a point, where the fads or the ideas are all about death and destruction and pride and vanity and et cetera, et cetera? While you're busy with all of that, they are plotting and planning to take control of every aspect of human life. And what that means literally is all they have to do is get complete control of the food and the interconnected trade that's involved with that food. And if you want to survive in their world with bottleneck genetics they created in a lab and produced food for whatever purpose, or you could try heirloom seeds, the same thing that's been feeding everybody this entire time of human civilization since domestication and farming started. Realize that each individual has the power to create, grow, and thrive. And not only just you, but your family, your neighbors, everyone around you. And all of that potential comes out of little lifeless, inanimate objects called seeds. If you don't think you can do that, make a friend that does that and find some kind of trade. And you were talking about silver and gold. You imagine how much of that people have hoarded over time for different occasions and always turned out to be right. Except for, God forbid, you get intercepted wearing all your precious metals because you waited too long. People were right about holding on to their precious metals, about holding on to their seeds, about holding on to their land, because those are the only things that are important. None of this stuff that's going on television, from politics to entertainment, has anything to do with you surviving, thriving, and making it past the reset. And God forbid that, a natural reset is going to happen regardless of any plans of the elite. And that's what people just don't understand. You think back, I keep bringing it up, 536 AD. They were just living, and then about 526 or something like that, they had a big earthquake in the Byzantine Empire that was kind of like the indication of things to come. And then everything got dark. Everything got dusty. Everything got cold. Nothing was growing, nothing. And this event just happened in a few years. So if you think that it can't happen to us, you are delusional and naive, because it can. And it can be anything from World War III to a natural phenomenon. And what are you going to do with nothing when the power's turned off? Your refrigerator food is rotten. You don't have nothing in the cupboards. Because let me tell you, that's like 80, 90% of the population are living not only from paycheck to paycheck, but from meal to meal, meaning they don't have any food. Most of the people, if you ever visit in the city, you go to their house, there's nothing in their house because they're so used to the instant gratification life that they think they can just go down to the deli or the store or whatever and just get their meal for today and for tomorrow. But once they close, you can't do that. So what are all those millions of people going to do? Well, they're going to come for the people that prepared, or they're just not going to make it. And that's a sad reality. I don't want to, be Debbie Downer, but the positive part of this is you don't have to be one of those people. You can start planning, and even if you haven't started growing or stocking, you can do that now. It takes a little bit of time, but once you start going, you get more and more and more safety and insurance and peace of mind that you're going to be able to handle whatever comes, whether it's flood, hurricane, all of it. Why not be prepared instead of just waiting like deer in the headlights for something to happen and then wondering what you're going to do about it then?
If the power goes down, and I know it's going to be down for a long period of time, like just say you knew it was going out for weeks, plural, or a month or something, I would use my generator to keep my freezers going, but at the same time, I would instantly be pulling out the canning jars and canning that as I go, and use the generators to keep your refrigerators cool while you start to can. That would be a wise thing to do, because you're going to have to immediately do something with that meat. If it goes out for that period of time, meat, you can still preserve it. Just can it. That's, again, you're going to want to save some of your veggies and things, too. You're going to need to can some of that stuff. You could dry some, but canning. Some of those are old skills. Again, that's like an 1870s, 1860s thing, even further back. Think about your grandmother, grandfather, way back. Everybody canned. it's just going to revert into the past a little bit. It was kind of a cool communal thing too. People, neighbors would combine, and maybe you have like 100 pounds of apples or 200 pounds, and everybody skins them, cores them, and makes applesauce at the same time, and then you can that, for example. It's families, and it's kind of a fun thing. It's all about finding solutions and answers, because the world we see, it's changing. It's absolutely changing. That's great. We see it. Yeah, huge signpost in the middle there. Okay, now what do you do? That's the whole thing. What do you do next?
I'm thinking, the U.S. dollar, because I've been really diving into this Brinks thing to see if it really is going to overtake the dollar. And from all, scales, it looks like it's about doing equivalent right now. And more, like I just saw Lula, from Brazil. They're happy to push this idea of socialism, communism light, whatever you want to call it. And all of these guys are going with China and Russia, and it's in their interest because obviously the other side of the ideas is all situated in the U.S. dollar, because we've let them decide, how that's going to be, what worth. We've given the power over to the central banks. We've allowed oil-rich countries to continue to sell us stuff instead of us, using our own wealth here. We're getting to that time where don't worry about all the oil and the dollars and stuff. What you're worried about is a plate of food. And I hate to say that because, I've never really worried so much about money, but you know what? Being poor, one thing that you do have to deal with every once in a while is an empty belly. And everybody knows if you have children, you're willing to do just about anything to spare your child from feeling that feeling of starvation. And I don't care where you live. If you live in Africa, if you live in South America, North America, it does not matter. It doesn't matter your religion. It doesn't matter none of that stuff. When it comes down to your children not being able to eat, people are willing to do some really extraordinary things. And I don't mean in a positive way. So we need to take a hold of that vibration and send it into a different direction, at least for us or the people or the people you can reach or the people you can talk to that will actually listen and agree with you that things are going in a bad direction. And that way you'll have a little network set up so that at least you, your friends, your community can pull resources together. If you want to do it that way, you can go at it on your own, but I wouldn't suggest it because work is really hard to do by yourself. I mean, I know that for a fact. I've done lots of work. It's easier to do it with a couple of people. Things can get done faster. You can ask the Amish, when they put up a barn or they do whatever they do, they just slap it up because everybody comes together. They're not getting paid for that. They're actually putting into the community. And that's an idea that we're going to have to start dealing with. And I realize we're a capitalist country, but capitalism is built on the idea of a free market. And there's no more free of a market than only dealing with people that, have the same mindset as you as far as growing food, producing things, trading and information that is actually worth trading. Different farm techniques. There's all kinds of people out there that have little pieces to the puzzle on how each of us can do our part and produce enough. And whenever you intertwine that with other people, it becomes so much more production happening. So even if you're out there gardening, it's hard to do everything by yourself. However, a single person can grow enough food for probably 5 people if they have enough time to do it. Now, a lot of people are stuck in jobs and revolve around that. So somebody in your family or everybody a little bit should pitch in to make sure that you have a backup plan of growing stuff and storing stuff. And we need to get out of this whole idea. And if you haven't noticed, everything from food to entertainment to news, you name it, it's kind of like the TikTok effect, but it's deeper than that. Basically, they have figured out that human beings are like goldfish. And as long as you can keep them with a constant, instant gratification of whatever it is, whether it's media, whether it's news or food, instant gratification. So you don't think about nothing in the future. That's how the entire system is now set up, because they realize that for the most part, humans are like goldfish. They only can concentrate on things for 7 to 9 seconds.
I think that supply chains are going to start constricting even further. I mean, look at the way that the world laid out. These really incredibly complex supply chains are now starting to fracture in the middle of everywhere. Political strife. We didn't even talk about the ozone depletion event that's going to wipe out food production further in the southern hemisphere. The tipping point. Humanity's here. We're seeing it everywhere. So how do you protect your friends and family? Because you got to think everybody has survived. We would not be here having this conversation if people had not survived the last 8,000 or 10,000 years of events that were far greater than what we're going to experience. It just takes a little prepping, a little bit readiness, and I do believe that we'll be able to get through this.
You know, when we're talking about these seeds and the storable foods to go with it, you're going to have to probably invest in both of these ideas. When you go through the list of the seeds that they give you, these heirloom seeds, they're the best type of food that you could possibly get or grow yourself. But you have this backup of the food storage that lasts 25 years.
And that's heavensharvest.com. Use the code ADAPT at checkout. That's ADAPT. Take 15% off your order.
Whatever comes your way, weather, war, whatever it is, you're prepared, you have security. At least you know that your belly's going to be full so that you can continue on the work that needs to be done to stabilize everyone's life around you.
And now on with the video.
And, you know, it's hard to keep a cohesion, especially if you have all of these other factors distracting you in life that you think are important, but they're not really important. And I've realized that long ago. The only thing that's really important is health. And, you know, the health of the people around you, and that's mental health and physical health. You're not going to do anything if people are malnourished or they're mentally upset, which goes along with being malnourished. And that brings you back to what we're talking about. Whenever only the elite or only the corporations or only the government have control over the food, they have control over your body. They have control over your mind. And when you're eating their foods and you're playing the whole game, and let's face it, when you go to the grocery store, you're not looking at food. You're looking at food-like stuffs with advertising that's targeted to you with fads of the current culture. And that's all it is. From everything to like when you go down the grocery store and your kids are looking eye level with these cartoon characters that are, you know, telling them, buy my food, buy my food. And then when you think about what is all that food, that's the stuff that they're pushing that you just don't want to eat. It's not actually food. It's food-like stuff. And that's what you're paying for. You're paying for the fad, you're paying for the message, and you're paying for the packaging. And what you get really when you realize and you come home from the store and you paid $300 and you got like 6 boxes, a couple bottles, and what is this? It's 2 or 3 days worth of supplies. That's not going to work unless you're really, really rich, and then you can do that. But if you're poor, the packaging, all of that's waste. So if you're growing your own food and you're getting it right out of your yard, you're literally bringing it from your yard to your plate. You're cutting out all of other things that could possibly happen to your food, including contamination. But with the laws the way that they are, where the packaging can't tell you the country of origin, you don't know what you're eating. So I would suggest if you're still going to the store, which, by the way, it's been tested, and there's stuff even in the organic stuff. And if you don't believe it, you can find somebody with a microscope and dig through it yourself. You're going to find stuff in there that doesn't belong in there, from plastics to other things that are unknown. This way, you can't get away from their system unless you are eating your own supplied food, that you take control of where you get every single bite, where you drink your water. Like, I haven't drank any tap water or regular water for probably 20 years because I knew what was in it and I knew what it did to you and I know who came up with it. So I didn't want any part of it. I've been drinking, reverse osmosis water since then. And that's a big thing. And you brought that up earlier. Where are you going to get the water from? And it goes back to this idea of instant gratification. I'm thirsty. I need a can of soda. I'm thirsty. I get a bottle of water. What happens when they don't have the stuff at that store, at your convenience store, at your grocery store, whatever? You going to drink the tap water? I mean, haven't we learned our lesson on that? Flint, Michigan, et cetera, et cetera. You don't want that. You want a source of your own water. So that's just as important as your food. I don't know. Like here, there's a source of water that no one can control, and it's called snow, and it melts and it runs off the mountain. And I happen to be lucky enough to live by a mountain where I know that they can't control all of the water. And if you don't have water filters, you're really up the creek without a paddle. I mean, you're drinking contaminated stuff, basically. I mean, that's how it is. So in order to get our mind and body in sync, we not only have to do that for ourselves, but we need to connect to other people that are on the same trip of being clear-headed. What's going into your body is making you susceptible to ideas, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. So how are we going to be able to take control of the food? You can only do that working with other people. You have to think about just the mind shock, people getting out and actually having to get on the land every day and do the work, be able to grow enough for yourself. That's a huge amount of work. Now, if you have many people working together, it's much easier. You'd have to think about how many calories the average person would need per year. 1 million calories? 2 million? You'd have to think about someone comes from fat. Where's your oil coming from? Again, that comes back down to raising something. Rabbits, goat, sheep, whatever it would be, birds. Some fat source needs to come in there. And then, have the whole animal husbandry thing. And then, what about the grains that you're going to use to feed your animals? And also the hay. They're going to need something for the wintertime to get them over. Now you're talking about growing what? 1 or 2 acres just for feed and fodder on the grain side, and then equally another 2 to 3 acres for something like Sudan sorghum grass to get them a huge amount of green matter to get them through the winter. Now you think about now you're growing it for the animals too. So it's going to take more than you're going to need some help. But if you can get it to that economy of scale where you actually have that land, I promise you there will be people there that would want to help you grow that on that land so they could stay on there. Simple accommodation. If people had woodworking skills, for example, they could build some decks and you could put your tents on it and you could live in the forest, come back to the main house for dinner. Got food, extra hands, groovy spot, almost like an organic farm. But people would want to stay where it's safe. I want to talk about weight for a second, because you said something really important about gold being just for the money to hold on to the store of value. It's only just to hold on to the value. Silver's more of an investment, and gold is just to hold it. But you think of the 80-to-1 ratio right now, and it was 120-to-1 or 120, 118 ratio of how many ounces of silver it would take to buy 1 ounce of gold. When COVID started, it was 120 ounces of silver would buy you 1 ounce of gold. You're right. The price didn't move that much. But now it's down to 80-to-1, or 80 ounces of silver to buy 1 ounce of gold. The thing is the weight on it. So if you take 80 and you divide by 16 to make a pound, you get 5 pounds of metal. You have to move 5 pounds of silver to equal 1 ounce of gold. Now the weight in that, you could slide that one coin in your pocket, walk away with it if you need. Now, let's say you're trying to take 5 ounces of gold. That's 25 pounds of metal. You're definitely going to get caught with that 25 pounds of silver walking through somewhere. Holy smokes. That would make you a target anyway. 25 pounds of silver, sheesh. So there are some needs for some things at certain times. People working on or around in a community will be one of those. So it might be a good idea to start talking with others around you about some of these same things. Now, it might seem woo-woo a little moment for a lot, but it does seem like the messaging's coming through completely clear for everybody across all strata, high and low. Everybody's getting the same messaging. Something's going to flip in the economy, and I could just boil it down to pretty much that. Something's going to flip in the economy. Consistent messaging everywhere. Usually, that kind of messaging would be constricted into just the business news or the finance news or the publications for real estate or the office rental, publications. Now it's going to get turned on its head. Even way down, anybody who reads just like CNN in the day or just anybody talking anything on the street understands there's a problem with the economy and the way stuff costs so much right now, and it's not going to go down, and it keeps running away, and people are asking, why does it keep increasing? The whole planet gets it. The whole planet understands it's about to flip, or something is in motion of flipping. And that's messaging from the bottom to the top and top to the bottom. That's what I'm saying. If you start the conversation, sometimes it's going to be a little easier now to do than it would have been like pre-COVID when you've been laughed off the floor.
Predictable, though. We talked about this last year. The same thing is the old thing, but different. Because although we talk about community and all these other things and what we're going to do and what we think people are going to do, when the time comes to it, a lot of people go ahead and they'll do stuff that they knew that they shouldn't do to get along. And we can't have that mindset. You might have to do it in public as camouflage because of the way things are going. It's that instant gratification. So they can pump dopamine in your mind every 5 to 9 seconds with entertainment, like I said, news. It doesn't matter what it is. It's all set up like that, and all of it doesn't have anything to do with you filling your belly. That seems so obvious that it's really bizarre that us in the future have got to a point where we're having to talk about something that people in the past already knew. That was day-to-day life. They already knew, oh, the weather's bad. You know what? I'm going to save back some of these seeds in case we have a bad year. I don't want to waste them all this year. I'm going to try to grow. If it doesn't grow or whatever, we have it for seeds. We can eat it. If we're starving, that's the great thing about as far as growing stuff. You don't have to eat it. It's weird because I grew a garden, and 3 years ago we started eating squash and tomatoes and stuff, and it wasn't long until, I got this face from the family like, oh, squash again. So you might not want to eat it all the time, but you can store it. And guess what? It doesn't matter how many times you eat it in a row. When you're hungry, it's going to be delicious. It's going to be nutritious, and people will get over it. This whole idea that they're kind of bringing back this whole idea of what we already lived through tells you they are not done with their plans. Destabilization is one of their favorite words. To the Middle East, that's what's happening to Europe. That's what's happening to the Americas. They are about being the empire, and they are going to continue and restrict and collect all of the resources available going into any kind of emergency. And if they're already acting like that when supposedly the planet's fine as far as food goes, imagine, what kind of measures they're going to start taking when people are actually hungry and demanding that their representatives and their governments do what they want. There lays in the problem. We have 2 different vibrations and 2 different ways of thinking. Meanwhile, your resources are dwindling away. And just think about if each person, whether they're poor, rich, middle class, whatever they are, do their part to grow some food with the resources they have now. When the resources run out other places, it's not such a hit. That's when we start finding charities and different things that start helping the cohesion of civilization stay together. And I really hope that it'll go that way. But if you want to see what's really going on, go down to your grocery store and look at what's there, and then divide that by the population that's probably going to that store. And you will realize they don't have anything. They barely have enough to feed like a little tribe at each store. And then we all know that it shuts down in 3 days if they don't get a delivery. So these are real things that we're going to have to deal with. The potential for anything to happen. And whenever you start doing this stuff, not only is it fulfilling to grow your own stuff and look at what you've accomplished, but just that whole idea of worry. It kind of fades away because you're going to be eaten fine. If your belly's full, you can do whatever you want. And that's what ancient man did. They ate, they had a fire, they had music and wine, and they were basically living the life that we should be living now. We gave it away.
Because I'm looking at a headline here. I was jumping back on the net because I found a Zero Hedge article talking about flooded California farmland delays plantings, and I looked down and I was reading it. 69,000 farms are going to be disrupted for vegetables and fruits, planting delays. And Ransom, I found a percentage for you. 227% of average as of March 27th was the latest totals they have for the snowfall, which means 2.2 times higher than ever. So think about that. 10% more moisture added up into the atmosphere. Hugatonga eruption, January 2022. And suddenly everything is doubling its snow and rain records. Do you think it's a coincidence? So where do you think, what do you think there's a correlation between the water bearer and a huge water vapor eruption in our atmosphere that they've never seen before? Maybe this is a cycle, too. When the water bearer comes back, maybe that volcano erupts once every 25,000 years, but it erupts. They know the cycle. When we enter Aquarius, that one erupts and you get this huge, gigantic water plume around the planet. Now imagine knowing that cycle in itself. Every 20,000, every 25,000, every 12,500 years, you get this one single eruption out of the middle of the ocean right there, and you get a water vapor planet for a few years, and you know that one for sure. That's a no-brainer. Put your money on red. Spin the roulette wheel, my friend.
Yeah, they're calling that Fort Lauderdale event 1 in 1,000-year event there. To think that, you would have to think that we've lived this cycle more than once. And I've always argued that if the Mayan and other cultures had a 26,000 year history of the precession of the equinox, they didn't just watch it one time. They had to have seen it go around twice. It has to be a 52,000 year cycle for them to know that it repeats. So we know that every 2,000 years, a different constellation in the sky is up there dominating, and this one's going to be Aquarius. And I like to compare things to ancient times. The Cahokia civilization appeared in the Mississippi Valley in the middle of the United States about 600 AD. And they started building pyramids and platforms. And I think that the push to do that is because of what happened probably 50 to 60 years earlier, which was the whole several years or decade of darkness. Now that civilization started flourishing, and the strata that tells us what was going on there says through several hundred years, they dealt with severe droughts, and they kept building closer and closer to the river. But at some point, a massive flood happened down the Mississippi, and we know that because the Cahokia civilization just stopped dead in their tracks. And what we find through their archaeological evidence is this big layer of silt and clay showed up, and that at the same time as they stopped doing anything in all these places. So for you to think that if you live along the Mississippi Valley and, you're measuring things on how long they've been taking records for, you might be in for a surprise to find out that every so often that entire river gets about 3 or 4 times the size that it normally is. And that could last for years, depending on what the cycle is doing. But what happens if the pattern lasts 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and then on top of that, you start having geologic additions to the amount of water in the atmosphere, like, say, this volcano goes up. You were bringing up the Russian volcano that's, did I hear you say 60,000 feet? Now imagine that happening in 5 or 6 different places on the earth at once, and you could see if you don't literally have supplies to make it a decade, you might not be around at the end of that. Maybe that's not going to happen, but it sure does seem like the governments of the world are planning for hard times. Otherwise, they wouldn't be pushing so fast. And I think this really started when Japan gave the world the idea of just-in-time shipping. So that's why when you go to the store and you have a certain thing, guess what? They didn't buy it. They have all the stuff that didn't sell there, but they didn't reorder the stuff that sells, the stuff you want. Because we no longer are on a supply and demand type of economy. So right there means that you're going to have to decide where you're going to get your supply for your demand, which means creating your own produce, creating your own products, and interweaving that with other people that are doing the same thing so that we can continue on despite what's going on.